Thanks so much. I hope you had a wonderful lunch, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our panel, How is AI Reshaping the Healthcare Industry? I am joined with some fabulous panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their particular company. But I want to open by saying that obviously AI is a force that is here. The question is it a force for good or is it a force for not good? There are some statistics that suggest that AI could save the US healthcare system over $150 billion annually by 2026. But what are the costs of that? And that's something that we want to explore today. Certainly, those of you that have tried the large language models, these are incorporating themselves into our daily lives. And it's no longer a futuristic tool, right? It's here. The question is, how is it going to have an impact in the way that we deliver care, in the way that we recruit patients for clinical trials, and the way that doctors interact with their patients? So with that opening, I'm going to turn to my left, and I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and their background and company, and then we'll launch into the discussion. Bobby?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bobby Reddy, CEO and co-founder of Pernosis. We built the first FDA-approved AI tool for sepsis detection. So we'll talk about that today.
Hi there, I'm Chelsea Vane. I lead product for GE Healthcare's Care Intellect family of applications. Care Intellect applications are built using a common cloud-first infrastructure, allowing our customers to deploy one and then deploy many, solving multiple different operational and clinical workflow problems. I'm very excited for the discussion today.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Beatty. I'm co-founder and chief strategy officer of Inato. Inato is a technology platform built to transform clinical research by partnering with clinical research sites across the world and pharmaceutical companies to change the way they work together to conduct research. A little bit about me. My background is in pharmaceuticals. I was at Bristol Myers Squibb for about 16 years running clinical trials. And really early in my career, I worked at Yale in the multiple sclerosis clinic with patients, actually talking with people about what it means to participate in a clinical trial and what an important decision that is in their own personal care journey. So I have a very good perspective of both sides of that ecosystem.
Okay, so I'm going to be asking questions here, but we're really interested in also your questions to these panelists. So you don't have to wait, just raise your hand as we're talking. I'll call on you if you want to ask them questions about what they're saying or if you have your own questions. But let me just start with the positive, right? Where is AI already driving value? So we have examples on here of patient care with sepsis. We have the entire enterprise as well as workflows with GE Healthcare. And we have recruiting patients, the right patients, to clinical trials fast. Tell us a little bit about how AI is working in your particular projects to give you tangible wins and allow you to do something that you weren't able to do without AI. So I'll start with you, Bobby.
Yeah, so for our tool, it's called the Sepsis Immunoscore. What it does is it incorporates data from many different modalities to better understand a patient's chance of developing or having sepsis. So we include vitals, we include standard labs, we include demographic information, and then we include additional biomarkers that give us a deeper insight into patient biology. So by combining all of this together for the first time, we can holistically determine whether or not a patient's going to develop sepsis or not.
Well, what is it, and maybe for some of the people out there that aren't as familiar with the problem of sepsis, what is it that AI and all of this data integration allows you to do that you couldn't do before this?
Yeah, so sepsis is a very heterogeneous syndrome. You know, a lot of people talk about it as a disease, but it's actually more of a syndrome. It's a collection of a lot of different diseases that are grouped into one word. And so that heterogeneity is very difficult to deal with. And so that's where the AI can be useful by combining, again, different parameters together to better understand the patient's chance of deterioration. And at the end of the day, it's about using AI to deconvolute the heterogeneity of the patient population.
And before Pernosis, right, you were leaving it up to a physician's judgment as well as the patient presenting with kind of, you know, really hard to miss symptoms. And so you might miss patients before they actually start to deteriorate and before you can intervene. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So depending on the physician that you get, depending on their past experience of understanding how all these data parameters come together, you're kind of at the risk of their training and their past experiences. Whereas with the sepsis immunoscore, it's more standardized. It's based on thousands of past patients, and so it's more accurate, it's more unified, it's more holistic.
Sort of like having a huge body of physician knowledge at your fingertips.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so talk to me a little bit about GE and what you're doing in the hospital, because you're working with both patient flows as well as the enterprise. So tell me a little bit about what it is that you're able to do with AI that you weren't able to do before.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic question. When I look at
Thank you.
I think I like to up-level it a little bit, because when we look at it and we say, which things are you solving with AI, there are so many, right? It can be everything from how are you ensuring that the device is up and ready to use? It's how do you improve scan times within the device itself? How do you work within the care pathway to be able to summarize and provide quicker access to a patient record, quicker decision-making through the enterprise? And when I say that specifically, walking through each of those stages, we have a number of applications that are on device right now, like Air Recon DL, which is able to decrease scan times by 50%. So that's something that you couldn't have done without AI previously, and it's increasing the access to care that you can get, because you can, with that technology, you can increase the number of scans you can do. You can support more and more patients. Same thing within the care pathway.
And this is with both CT as well as MRI?
So Air Recon DL is MR specifically, but we do have GE Healthcare is leading right now with 85 FDA-approved applications for med device. Right. So we do have AI applications that are running on CT as well as MR.
But it's a big deal to improve scan times for MRI because they are so long.
Exactly. It's so long. It's also, in some cases, like Sonic DL, it's the ability to give access to patients who wouldn't previously be able to get a scan. For example, there, when we talk about it, it's a cardiac scan. They can't necessarily, someone in cardiac failure, for example, wouldn't be able to hold their breath for that scan. By being able to reduce the time for that scan by 83%, we're able to be able to provide access to that patient. If we go beyond that into the care journey, right, so many of us, I mean, we're all patients, right? And so many of us, when we're trying to get an appointment, we're told the next appointment you're gonna get is 2 weeks from next Tuesday. If we can reduce the amount of time and effort that goes into each one of those visits, because currently clinicians are jumping between multiple different systems to get up to speed on a patient, you can increase access for that patient. That's something that we're doing with Care and Select for oncology, for example. Oncologists, when they're getting up to speed to see a patient for the first time, they're jumping through the EMR, they're jumping into the PACS system, they're reading through pathology reports. It takes a lot to bring all of that together. By aggregating all that multimodal data into a single unified view and then summarizing that using AI, we're actually able to reduce the time it takes to get up to speed on that patient and increase the amount of time the provider can spend with that patient. And then finally, you brought up enterprise. That's another area that we're playing. When Command Center is the technology that we have in that space, and that's really looking at acute or inpatient capacity management. And through the impacts we've had in length of stay, for example, with Deaconess, we've been able to increase patient access by 2,000 patients annually. So there are some pretty significant numbers that we're changing to provide that access to care using AI.
That's great. Liz.
Great. Well, I think we're having a different slice of the puzzle here from our perspective. So we've heard so much hype about AI and drug discovery. And what we're seeing is that we might get a lot more compounds through discovery into the clinic, but if we don't fix our drug development process and our clinical trial process, it's all going to slow down and become a major bottleneck. That's the part that we're really focused on, is how do we speed up clinical trials so that we can increase the pace of new medicines coming to patients. So for us, we've been really focusing on enrollment. as the major problem. We know that over 80% of trials miss their timelines because of enrollment problems. So actually finding the right patients that meet the criteria in the protocol is much more complex and takes many, many man-hours for all the researchers across the world. So what we've done is we've taken that very manual process of reading through hundreds of pages of charts, going through labs, going through all the patient's information to see if a person meets the criteria for that particular trial. And we've built a series of AI tools and models to actually automate all of that for the researchers. So they can take something that could take hours of time down to minutes and still enable the human to make the final decision. Is this person a good fit for the trial? But giving them the access to all of the data they need to make that decision really quickly. And we've seen really meaningful results around this. We save on average between 25 minutes to over an hour, depending on the complexity of the trial, for each chart review that they use our tool on. And if you do the math on that for a regular phase 3 studies, this comes out to be about 1,300 man-hours on one trial, which equates to about $5.7 million of cost avoidance and savings of time. So when you extrapolate that across all the different trials that are running in research, we actually can speed up the pace of research by enabling the use of AI in this part of the ecosystem where it's been historically such a pain point and couldn't be addressed before the new advancements in AI that exist today.
Yeah, I think I read on a blog on your website that said that it could take up to 7 hours to go through all of the patient information to decide whether or not they were a good candidate for that trial. And so if you think about that multiplied across the country with multiple trials, that's insane.
Yeah.
So yeah. Great. Questions from the audience? Yes. I think that's a great question for all three. I do want to emphasize that I think what's unique, or maybe not unique, but what's cool about all three of our panelists is they are all using multimodal information. So I think it's a really good question of what do you build yourself versus what do you buy? And I'll just start on the other side with Liz.
Yeah, that's great. So we've actually been using open models that are available off the shelf, but we have optimized each step of the process with the model that gives us the highest accuracy. So we have a series of LLMs that run. One de-identifies the patient personal information first because we don't want to upload any personal health information into an open LLM. And then after that, there's a series of LLMs that we use to go through and determine diagnosis, then go through each inclusion-exclusion criteria, come up with a rationale for why or why not the criteria has been met. So what we found is different models off the shelf actually have better accuracy, and we've been able to really increase our accuracy rate by optimizing based on the model we use. So we actually published recently on this, and we're at about 95% accuracy, and we get constant feedback from the researchers because they go in and confirm or change our assessment through AI for each patient that is evaluated. So we've been really thinking about how do you use off the shelf as much as possible, but the right model for each step of the process.
Chelsea?
I feel like I'm just going to repeat what Liz said because that's a very similar approach to what we have, right? There's value in both buy and build. It's really evaluating what is the key use case, what are the target metrics you're going for, and then being able to ensure quality, validation, security. Those are critical factors before you would go out and use something on the market. But if you can confirm those, there's a lot of value in being able to use something on the market versus build it yourself. It's really time to market and use case.
Bobby?
Yeah, so for our core model, we built it ourselves. That's what we pride ourselves on doing. But for all the other aspects that are hospital facing, we use other components.
So I think that's really interesting, right? How do you actually establish your product? One thing that I think would be really interesting to talk about is how do you see it as a strategic advantage to your customer? So obviously you're solving a particular problem, but there's so much more that you can also glean. So Bobby, you're helping hospitals figure out which patient might be susceptible to sepsis, but you can also be used, let's say, to select for clinical trials. Talk to me a little bit about the strategic advantages that Pernosis.
Yeah, so a large advantage of what we have is that we're built into the health systems, so we can literally stream data in real time about any patient in the hospital, in the emergency department, hospital, in the acute care setting in general. And so that's useful for screening for sepsis, but it's also useful for running our own trials. So we have future products in development where we need to run trials where we need to target a specific patient population. And so because we're streaming data in real time and running it through all these AI algorithms in the background, we can intelligently select for specific patient profiles that are necessary for our own products. But ultimately, we're also setting this up as a service for pharma and for diagnostic companies to help recruit patients into trials similar to what Liz was talking about.
Chelsea?
Yeah, so if I'm looking at this, the strategic advantage is an interesting one because we play in so many different places. Pulling it together, I really think it does come down to the overall foundation of how we build. We're using a common architecture, which allows us to aggregate this multimodal data into one place, integration with single sign-on, so that we can develop backwards with our customers. So we have some key applications working with our customers that we know we need to solve those problems, whether that's clinical workflow productivity or operational productivity. Both of those are places we've started, but we have the ability to scale into more specific use cases or even expand out broader than the enterprise. And that's really the flexibility that we have from the infrastructure.
Yeah, and for us, our core product actually is around building the right strategy up front to execute your clinical trials. So this AI component I just shared about patient pre-screening only amplifies that. So if you think about the process, what pharmaceutical companies do today, they use a lot of data to determine which researchers around the world are the right fit to actually run the trials. We have a whole technology platform and matching algorithm to do that strategic work already with our pharmaceutical customers. And then we layered on these AI tools to not only make sure you're getting the right strategy up front for the right researchers to conduct your trials, but that they also can deliver on their enrollment commitment. So for us, having the foundation of 5,000 researchers around the globe using our core platform has become a strategic advantage for us to roll out these other AI tools and be really transformational across the process for the pharmaceutical companies.
So Liz, can you actually help your clients figure out feasibility? So if somebody comes to you and they say, I want to enroll this clinical trial in X time, and you can look at it and say, you're not going to do it in X time, but if you relax these criteria, you could, or if you change this?
Yes, and we do a lot of that early planning with contributions from the actual researchers who see the patients. So the data alone only gets you so far because things are constantly changing. New medicines come to market. There are other competing trials that are out there. So using historical data alone only gets you so far. We have data coupled with an engagement platform with the clinical researchers to really balance, do you have the right strategy? Are you in the right countries? Do you have the right timelines? And then how could you operationalize that in a better way? So if you added more sites in a certain market who had access to a large number of patients, could you accelerate your timelines? So all of those strategic questions are things we look to solve in our core platform, and then we use AI to make sure we deliver on it.
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
I think, Liz, you might have touched on this, but
There's a microphone behind you.
I probably need it. So Liz, you might have touched upon this. I know this is an AI conference, but or discussion, but there are probably use cases, and you touched upon this briefly, where the cost benefit doesn't apply to. You don't need it. You can use a lot of different capabilities, machine learning, et cetera, to get to what you want to get to. Can you talk about that a little bit in terms of your thought process as to when to leverage it or not?
Yeah, I completely agree. So I'm talking about technology more broadly than just AI, and AI is only one component of it for sure. So I think it goes to what are you trying to solve, and then what's your best method to do that. We actually have a innovation board at our company made up of pharmaceutical companies and sites, And they say that to me all the time. We want to solve real problems and apply this technology to solving those real problems. And in doing that, first you get, are we focused on the right thing? And then you have to go to what's the right method to tackle that. So I would say AI is only one of our tools in our tool belt, and you have to make a really good decision with your engineering team on what's the best method to get there. So we do a lot of work just with traditional data and surfacing that. Without AI, we do a lot of engagement with sites to get real feedback in real time. That's not with AI either, but it can be used more broadly with technology to speed up all of those different parts of the process. So I think it depends on what you're trying to solve is the real answer, and then think broadly about what's the best way to do it. I think right now, what I hear is the pendulum has swung, and everyone's like, let's apply AI to everything, which is not the right answer. We have to think about what are we really trying to solve and what's the right technology to do that.
And to that point of AI is not always the right answer. Oh, there we go. This is going to be a complex question. I'm going to try to distill it down and then get each of your thoughts on it. We're on the device side of things in development, and we're aware that many AI applications, and I don't know about Pernosis, but congratulations, you guys have an FDA de novo clearance, so that's awesome. But a question for each of you, in the AI that you touch, is the model developed using AI and then fixed, or is it a currently live learning model? And if it's a currently live learning model, how do you validate it? And how do you know that it doesn't degrade over time? That could result in a lot of answers. Did that make sense, though? Does the question make sense?
Start with Bobby.
Yeah, so our model is a fixed model, so we developed it and we fixed it. We did that for a variety of different reasons. The first and foremost reason was for the FDA, because the FDA knows how to regulate fixed models. The FDA does have a methodology now that they propose to regulate constantly updated models through what's called a predetermined change control plan. But it's a new program, and it remains to be seen how it's going to work. So we have future plans to update our model and resubmit to the FDA, and that's how we'll update our model, and we'll keep tabs on the predetermined change control plan with the FDA.
And so in our development, right, we start with a standard QMS process. I think most of us are using that as our approach. Then we leverage responsible AI principles. To your question of verification, validation, right, we have a team of clinical experts. So we will take that model out, we will tune it for a specific use case, and then we will verify and validate with that team of clinical experts to make sure that we're hitting the KPIs that we're looking for. After that, I think if you really dive in, it's making sure that you have full transparency as well, right? So for Care and Select for Oncology, we have a summarization capability as the core page that we're providing to an oncologist. Within that, for everything that we have, we provide direct source links to where they will be looking, so they'll have the raw information. That way they have clarity on what is there, and then always over time you're going to do monitoring to make sure that you're not seeing drift.
So I had mentioned earlier, I don't know, my mic comes in and out, but I had mentioned earlier, we're using a lot of off-the-shelf models. So I think our validation process probably looks very different from Bobby's. And really it's more about optimization for us. So because we're getting real-time feedback constantly from the researchers who are using the tool, we're looking to say, how do we get better and better at accuracy and use the right models to get there? But we aren't doing the same level of validation that Bobby would for a tool like his.
So in some sense, you're still developing models or working with existing models. Actually, the other two, you both restored my faith in healthcare, because I actually want a validated model to be used on me and my loved ones. So I really appreciate that. I did just want to make one more comment about the predetermined change control plan. I think it still has to be shown that if you can tell the FDA how the model is going to vary, that allowing it to vary down the road actually has any in the wild value. So I just want to put the point on that AI that's not live isn't really AI.
That's controversial.
The AI does not lie? Was that?
Sorry, using the English language for me. AI that is not live isn't AI.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that if you don't update the algorithm, then it's not AI?
If the algorithm's not learning live, then the fact that we used AI to get to a model that we then took back into our hands, applied to traditional validation, it's great if it's a tool that works. I mean, I've got ChatGPT on my iPad all the time, right? Like I'm using it all the time, but only to inform my own thinking. And so I just sort of a call for clarity in the discussion of what AI is. If the models aren't learning live in the healthcare environment, should we be even calling them AI? Because what's responsible that you're all doing, and I applaud it. I'm not trying to tear anybody down. Those models were fixed. They were validated as they should be, but that means when they go live, they're not actually artificial intelligence.
I think what's been really interesting from our perspective is how far the models have come over the last, I'll say 18 months. So I'll give you a real example, and maybe this can shed some light about how we're thinking about it. In a given protocol that we had, it was looking for the number of strokes a patient has had in a certain time frame without more than a certain number within another certain time frame. And when we asked researchers, how do you assess this criteria today? They said, well, we take a marker and we highlight every incident the patient had, and then we take a piece of paper and write all the timeline for each event, and then we do the calculation for how much time was between each event. I was like, wow, this could take you a lot of time for one patient to do that much tracking of all the events over time. Well, the AI over the time period that we built this tool went from being able to find within the medical record that these events happened to be able to understand how it could be written in different ways but mean the same event, and then be able to log time. So over an 18-month period, as the open models advanced, the medical understanding improved, its evaluation of time improved, and something that was taking someone maybe a good hour plus per person became something that technology can do instantly. So this is where I think actually there is an advantage of keeping pace with the open models and the learning that's happening in AI, and then applying the right model over time as they improve without it being a completely open model for people's personal health information that it's learning against. So we try to think about it from that lens, like what new models come out, what advancements happen in those models, how does that apply to the use case that we're improving our accuracy against, and then adjust the model that we have accordingly, if that helps to give you some perspective on how we're thinking about it.
I think that opens a really good, another line of inquiry, which is really about how do you think about the trepidation that one should feel lending a lot of decisions to AI. And what I want to talk about is trustworthiness, I want to talk about explainability, and I want to talk about what are the human checks, which I think is related in some way to say, you know, should you put the model out there and let it run free, or how often do you actually intervene? I'll start with you, Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, as we're kind of alluding to, there's all sorts of things grouped under AI. And so it's a very broad topic. But, you know, when it comes to making critical healthcare decisions, you know, I think that a locked model where you study the performance and you validate it is the only way that we know how to do it right now. And probably will be the only way we know how to do it for the foreseeable future. In terms of what is good enough, you know, AI is just a tool that enables you to develop a tool, and if it's locked, then you can study the performance just like any other diagnostic tool, and there you can follow the well-trodden paths of diagnostic companies. So that's kind of what we did. We used AI to develop our tool, we locked it, and then we studied sensitivity, specificity, PPV, MPV, the normal kind of stats, and that's how we got it validated and approved by the FDA. And a very important part of what we did actually was the explainability piece. And so we have an interface that actually explains on a patient-by-patient basis how the model got to the result that it did. and that's displayed to the physician so that the physician can use that to better build an intuition as to what's going on with their patient. So that was a really important part of our approval process. It was a human factor study that we did with that. So the explainability is really important. External validation. In the sepsis space, there's so many companies that have AI models nowadays, and they're selling them even though they're not supposed to, because we're the only FDA-approved solution out there. But when companies publish their own results and they show their own validation, that doesn't carry the same weight as an external validation by the FDA. So I think the power of external validation, the power of explainability, and then the third piece, what was the third one?
Third one, what about trustworthiness?
Trustworthiness. So that, again, I think comes down to the performance. Oh, and having the human in the loop, I think was. So for our tool, at the end of the day, the clinician is the one who makes the decision. They're guided by the tool, but it's part of the indication for use that it's used to support decision making. So at the end of the day, it's still the physician that is making the decision, not the AI.
Chelsea?
Yeah, breaking this into two sets of answers. One, on the clinical side, entirely agree. It's keeping the clinician in the loop and making sure that they're the one making the decision. AI is a tool. It can help them move faster. It can help them give more clarity of thought, but they're going to be the ones that make an ultimate decision. Now, we've been talking a lot about clinical AI. There's also the other side of this is using it in operations, right? When we look at healthcare, there's a huge world of things that live in the operations space, and AI is impacting that from how do I predict whether a device is going to go down? How do I do that in advance so that I don't have outages that impact patient flow? How do I optimize workflow through our patient journey throughout the hospital? How do I optimize care there? A lot of those areas we can bring in AI, and it's not looking at it at the clinical side of things. So it's just really understanding what tool you're using and how you're using it. And then going back, I'd like to emphasize something Liz brought up a little bit earlier. AI is, we use that term a lot. It's kind of the buzzword right now. It's out there. It's exciting what we can do, but it's not the panacea to everything, right? We can do a lot in, especially operational efficiencies, where we're just looking at rules-based decision making. We're doing analytics and statistics, traditional ML, all of those fall in. So when you're making a decision of should I be using AI for this use case, being able to lean in and say, what is the value of AI here versus what is the cost? Because AI is expensive. So be able to look at it and say, what is the cost benefit of it? Is it the right tool for me to use here? Or do I lean on some of those more traditional methods and then use AI where it's really offering some differentiated value?
And I fully agree. And I think to build trust actually means that you're getting that constant feedback from the people who are using it as that tool within their decision-making process. So we are really supportive of AI as a tool as well. At the end of the day, the physician's making the decision if a patient's eligible for a clinical trial, and how do we build that trust over time and show that the accuracy is there in the tool.
And so, and I think you've set up, but I'm just going to ask you to articulate it again. Like, how do you make sure that you are putting in safeguards to ensure that it is the clinician that is making this decision?
Yeah, so similar to what Bobby was saying, we actually surface like the justification, where in the source record the AI found the information. We bring it right up in front of the physician to say, oh, I can read this section of the chart and make my own determination. Do I agree or not with how the AI interpreted this particular piece?
So everything is explainable?
Yes, everything's explainable. Everything is right at your fingertips so that you don't have to search through it. Some of these records can be hundreds of pages long. So AI is really good at that. It can find information and surface it for you so you can make your own determinations. So I think that is a really critical piece of it. It's not a black box. It's about making the information available for the human to make the final decision.
Questions from the audience?
Oh, just adding one to that as well, right? Similarly, it is the transparency, right? Where we do the same thing in our summary capability is where is that information? And then I think back to your question, tracking it on the back end, right? Can you monitor where it's a fit or where it's not a fit is critical to building that trust over time.
Yes.
So far,
We can't hear you.
Sorry,
Oh.
I think the mic's not working.
Testing, testing. All right, there we go. Thank you all so much for the insight so far. I have a question from like a health system buyer perspective. In the context of AI and data, I feel like the big elephant in the room is always the EMR, specifically Epic. So from your perspective, as you're selling to health systems and trying to scale and grow, how do you navigate the conversation of what your solution either complements, supplement, or does something de novo compared to what Epic or the EMR can do? And I would love to get your insights stratified across like both the Gen AI capabilities versus like the agentic AI capabilities as well.
Sorry, Gen AI versus
Agentic AI.
Gen.
Thank you.
Who wants to take that first?
Oh, no, I was going to say, repeating the question, just to make sure we heard it. You're asking, how do you consider the difference between EMR and the applications we're building, and then talk about Gen AI versus agentic AI?
Yes, and the specific lens is because the EMR is typically a hospital's biggest, if not one of the biggest investments, it's often very difficult to navigate that conversation of what to invest additionally on top of the EMR versus optimizing what Epic already does or what EMR already does. So I'd love to kind of get your feedback on how do you differentiate or navigate what a buyer could do, where kind of the ceiling is, and what your solutions kind of can optimize on top of.
So are you saying hospitals already invest in Epic and their EMR? Why do they need these additional solutions if Epic is going to be mining all that data? Anyone?
I'm happy to take the EMR question. I'll leave the agentic question for my fellow panelists. Okay, so from our perspective, the EMR data often doesn't have the specificity that's required to determine the eligibility. So what you can build a query in your EMR to search for information, but it is very difficult to build a query that gets into the level of detail for each inclusion-exclusion criteria in a protocol. So what we found is that many companies have actually invested quite a bit of time and money in trying to figure out how to build the right EMR query, how to get to that data. But at the end of the day, it's only a small percentage of criteria that are actually in searchable fields. So what we're able to do is actually unlock the whole record. It could be handwritten notes, it could be lab reports, whatever is available for that particular patient and stored in the EMR, but it can be read and determined where within the whole record the patient is determined eligible or not for that particular trial. So I think the EMR is a great place to start for finding patients, but to get the specificity for each trial, you need to go much deeper than what's available and can be queried.
Bobby, I think this is a really interesting one for you to answer.
Yeah, Epic is powerful, but Epic can't do everything. They think they can do everything, but they can't. So in our case, what we did is we built a large biobank of samples, so physical blood samples. So we have over 120,000 blood samples, and we measure using wet labs. We measure a lot of additional information about the patient. That's something that I don't think Epic is going to do anytime soon. And so we have much more valuable data about what is actually going on from a biological perspective when it comes to the patient. And so in our tool, we actually we use additional biomarkers in addition to the EHR data. So that's our differentiation. But it's certainly a concern in general. I see why you're bringing it up in terms of Epic wants to do everything. From what we've seen, Epic can do certain things, especially with respect to billing, very well. But when it starts to go outside of that core competency, they tend to be more fast followers. They tend not to do as good of a job. But on the flip side, they give away things for free. So when we're going against Epic from a competitive perspective, they give away their sepsis tool for free. How we have dealt with that is that we pitch ourselves as a complement to the Epic sepsis tool. So the Epic sepsis tool screens for patients that might be at risk for sepsis. It has about 13% positive predictive value, meaning that it's only right 13 times out of 100 times. And so what we do is we put our tool on the back end of that with the additional biological information. We can get that up to 60 to 70% positive predictive value. So it's an add-on to Epic's tool as opposed to trying to fight against Epic.
And then Chelsea, as somebody who sells enterprise solutions, how do you think about that?
So I think it was well said on both accounts, right? You're looking at it and we're working backwards from our customers, right? It's listening to the customer and understanding where are they looking for additional help, where are they feeling that they need further exploration, we need to work with them. So it's understanding that. Epic owns the majority of the workflow. And so it's never looking at it and saying you're going to fully replace it, or it's not necessarily looking at it that way. It's saying how do you make sure that you're solving the right problem with the customer and then getting it into their workflow in front of them where it needs to be. I think you guys have done that very well. But when you look at it, I think that's how it needs to balance, right? We need to understand where is the customer, where's the clinician at, where is someone doing operations, and then meet them where they're at. On your other question, though, I'd love to dive into the agentic topic. So one of the applications that we brought forward this last year at Health was Health Companion, which is an agentic framework, which we're starting to explore. I was curious, did you have a specific, were you just asking what is agentics, or did you have a specific use case or question associated with that?
Not specific use case. What I'm starting to see across health system buyers is you have Gen AI, which generates a lot of data, which creates better insights and can improve decision making. But very often, I come from a rural healthcare system where we have a shortage or a lack of access to talent and labor. So like the ability to use agentic AI to supplement existing workforce to improve patient care, patient access, or operational workflow is very much top of mind, especially for underserved or under-resourced health systems.
Interesting. So with Health Companion, when we look at it, we're actually talking more about the agentic framework. So an agent in particular is what you're talking about, is how do you create an AI that's going to mimic an individual specialty, for example. What we're expanding that out into is actually being able to have those agents have a conversation, right, and have a debate to come to a use case. So an example there would be, say, a tumor board. Could you actually create a mimic for each of your specialties, a radiologist, an oncologist, a hematologist, a pathologist, put them together and have a discussion, and then have a supervisory agent who will take that information and come up with a suggestion on treatment. And then to the conversation of the clinician needs to make an example, and we need trust and explainability there. The benefit of working with an agentic system like that is that it can give you all of the thought process that went in, what went into each portion of that debate so that you can have full transparency. It's not making the decision, it's telling you across all of the different profiles that you've created, what was the thought process that went into it, and why are we suggesting it. So it's a couple of different technologies that I think transparently are still early stages, but it's ones that I do think can be a partner to a clinician.
Yeah, I think when it comes to actually implementing healthcare and making critical healthcare decisions, we are so far away from agentic AI taking over. I think when it comes to more operational type stuff with proper validation and proper supervising, then we can get there. But the FDA doesn't even know how to regulate. like we're still with fixed algorithms to the earlier point. Like we're so far away from agentic AI actually making critical life-changing decisions, I think.
Yeah, I'll share on the clinical trial side. They're using agentic AI to do things like gather a patient's charts. So you can take that burden of trying to get a referred patient's information to your center by using an agent. You can also call patients to ask them questions and follow up on things. So we're seeing more of a administrative use case of using an agent to take on something that's very time consuming for the staff, but doesn't do any of the actual direct healthcare management.
We only have about 1 minute left. Here, we'll take your question.
So I want to follow up on the actual healthcare decisions for Bobby Reddy. I'm curious, the extent, sepsis is a pretty interesting condition. It's very critical. It's measured by CMS. To what extent are hospitals at a point where if they don't implement something like what you're offering, they're at legal risk, that they settle for 13% when 70% is available? And secondly, if you might differentiate yourself from Bayesian and what they're doing with sepsis. So I'm curious as to both the speed of diffusion of innovation, whether by clinical or legal fears, and also how you differentiate yourself.
How do you make it so that everybody has to use Pernosis?
Yeah, it sounds like you're looking for a job in sales.
Hired.
I think it's slow. It's not like hospitals are going to be sued necessarily for not adopting a tool. However, when you have cases of patients that are missed over time, and when you can make the case that the patients wouldn't have missed with a tool, then lawsuits can move the needle. I do think it is a slow process though, with one FDA approved product now, we think that we are the ones that should be picked because we're the only ones that have external validation and we're approved by the FDA. But it is a slow process with hospitals because hospitals have a variety of tools that they can pick from, even though they're not supposed to necessarily buy certain ones that are not FDA approved. They still do. They also do have the Epic sepsis alert that they look at as well. So it's a slow process, but we feel like the hospitals are coming along.
Okay. We're at time, so I encourage you all to mob these guys when they are done. But just really quickly, lightning round, what is the one thing we need to solve going off into the next year for AI?
For me, it's adoption. The quicker we can get these types of tools into the hands of researchers, the faster we can reach the real ROI of using these tools.
Chelsea.
I think I'd also go with adoption, but it's more a slightly different flavor, right? How are we getting this in the workflow, and then how are we doing that consistently?
Bobby.
Yeah, for me, it's really about how we integrate AI into the workflow. How does it actually implement change in the workflow?
Great. So I want to thank all of the panelists as well as you for your great questions and for their great answers.